All right, good morning. Welcome everyone to this webinar and thank you for joining today. So this is the first webinar in our series on cybersecurity and digitalization that is focused on the supply chain in the energy sector. I am Scott Morgan, Principal Consultant with Enernex, and I'm going to help moderate today's webinar. For our participants today, please note that this webinar is being recorded and that all participants have been muted. We will be taking questions, so please use the Q&A window that you should see available either at the bottom or top of the Zoom window, and we will have time for Q&A after the main presentation. I think one of the first questions you always get, the recording of this webinar will be made available afterwards, along with the presentation materials. So with that as an introduction, just to give an overview of our session today, and as well as some upcoming sessions, I'd like to introduce Camilo Amadeo. Camilo is a senior energy advisor at the U.S. Agency for International Development, leading grid modernization and cybersecurity programs at the Center for Energy, Infrastructure, and Cities. She has over 20 years of international energy development experience. Since 2016, Camilo has been involved in USAID's cybersecurity programs, first with regulators, and presently, she manages the Energy Utility Partnership Program and Advanced Modern Power through Utility Partnerships, or AmpUp program, with the United States Energy Association. Camilo, please.
Thank you, Scott, and hello. On behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, I welcome all of you to our second round of webinar series in the energy sector, cybersecurity, and digitalization. This follows the first round of webinars from 2020 that served as a platform for learning what your colleagues from all over the world are working on to address cyber challenges. Those webinars reached over 4,000 people from 68 countries. This second round of series is focused on the supply chain in the energy sector, and I'm delighted to see such great interest in this webinar as well. The idea of having these series came after our regional workshops with energy stakeholders in Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We bring these series under the Advancing Modern Power through Utility Partnership, AmpUp program. It is a USAID-funded program that leverages USEA's members and AmpUp's consortium members' expertise to share their knowledge and practices, providing utilities with a menu of capacity building, technical assistance, and network strengthening opportunities in broader topics of energy resilience, energy efficiency, just energy transition, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. The overarching goal of these series is to discuss the cybersecurity challenges associated with the expanding supply chain necessary to face multiple transformations in the sector, including integration of renewables, deployment of grid edge technologies, and markets. Similar to the first round of webinars, we're inviting industry experts, utility practitioners to present, but we also want to include perspectives of various stakeholders, including from industry at large, like manufacturers. Like today we have Camilo Gonzalez from Yokogawa Corporations, regulators, industry associations, and government agencies, as well as international development and financing community, including colleagues from the World Bank. Webinars are structured into four thematic groups: risk management, asset management, policies and planning, and procurement. Please visit USAID website to see specific webinars to put them on your calendar. We welcome your active participation in today's webinar. Please send your questions via Q&A. Also, feel free to send us your reactions, suggestions on what you would like to discuss in the next series. I would like to thank Mr. Menzies, President and CEO of United States Energy Association, for joining us today to initiate this webinar series. Special thanks to Mr. Camilo Gonzalez from Yokogawa Corporation for setting the stage for our future discussions on the supply chain. And these series would not have been possible without contributions and support from Marjorie Jean-Pierre, Marina Barnett from U.S. Energy Association, and our moderator, Scott Morgan from Enernex. A big thank you to all of you for joining us today and spending your valuable time with us. Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Camilo. So next, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Mark Menzies. He is President and Chief Executive Officer of the United States Energy Association, as Camilo said. In this role, Mr. Menzies represents the broad interests of the U.S. energy industry and interacts with domestic and international leaders to advance knowledge and seek partnerships to develop and enhance energy infrastructure worldwide. He is the former Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy, and as Undersecretary there, he spearheaded the creation of DOE's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER, and he was responsible for directing transformative energy progress and technology development at DOE. So please, Mr. Menzies. You might be on mute though, sir.
Of course I was. Thank you, Scott, for that. And good morning to everyone. As Scott indicated, my name is Mark Menzies, and I am the President and CEO of the United States Energy Association. And it is my pleasure to be with you this morning at the first of our new 10-part series of knowledge-sharing webinars on key cybersecurity issues for the energy sector. This series is conducted, as you've heard, as part of our U.S. Agency for International Development funded program, Advancing Modern Power Through Utility Partnerships. For those new to USEA, the mission of USEA is to educate and inform the public about energy by convening nonpartisan forums such as this webinar. Internationally, USEA supports energy systems development by expanding access to safe, affordable, and sustainable energy in partnership with the U.S. government. For over 30 years, USEA has collaborated with USAID to provide capacity building assistance to our overseas partners for increased energy security and access. We do this by conducting programs that encourage the sharing of global best practices and the latest system and technological developments with private sector engagement to demonstrate market-based approaches to utility operations and management, implementation of regulations, and environmental safeguards. These programs have increased the institutional capabilities of USEA's overseas partners to manage more effectively their utility operations. And as we all know, the electricity sector is undergoing significant changes, from the development and application of new technologies to providing reliable service at competitive costs to meet customer expectations. The demand for more energy will rise as global economies continue to grow. Cybersecurity is a crucial component of this modernization process. We know the process of data digitalization, which underpins this modernization process, leaves utilities vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks if not accompanied by measures to protect digital communications and their IT and ICS processes. Failure to protect the digital components of utility operations can result in blackouts due to theft of information, leading to loss of controls over our communications with generation and transmission resources, as well as release of private information of customers, vendors, or employees. And of course, such breaches can lead to heavy fines if the utility is found to be out of compliance with the applicable regulations. Now more than ever, electric utilities must ramp up the development of robust cybersecurity strategies and resources to reduce cyber vulnerabilities, protect assets, and ensure reliability. To assist with these goals, this cybersecurity capacity building program was started in 2020 under the Business Innovation Partnership Program conducted by USEA under our collaborative agreement with USAID, the Energy Utility Partnership Program. The Business Innovation Partnership formed a global working group of electric utilities from USAID partner countries to support efforts to become more innovative and implemented a number of capacity building activities that assisted utilities in USAID partner countries to strengthen their cybersecurity practices. Overseas partners explored business models that use digital technology both as an enabler and a driver of change to renew and transform the current utility business into the utility of tomorrow. Under the Business Industry Partnership, USEA started with a 15-part webinar series, plus 2 industry panels at the end, on topics such as understanding cyber threats and building blocks of cybersecurity, renewable energy integration and cyber considerations, distributed energy resources, and corporate culture and the importance of cyber hygiene. An online course was developed by uploading the videos of these webinars to an online learning platform and the addition of 3 live virtual sessions hosted by cyber experts. The online course was offered to our overseas partners with the requirement to develop an action plan outlining how their organization would use the information gained from the webinar series. At the conclusion of the webinar series, information presented in the series was compiled and resulted in the Electricity Sector Cybersecurity and Digitalization Handbook to be used as a resource by our overseas utility partners. This handbook was also translated into Spanish, French, and Vietnamese. In an industry that is continuously evolving and changing, we found it was necessary to begin a second round of webinars to deliver updated information to our partners. This new series will focus on supply chain and procurement risks. Information from these webinars will once again be compiled into a revised handbook emphasizing relevant cybersecurity issues, challenges, technologies, and practices. So we are pleased to begin our first webinar with Mr. Camilo Gómez, Global Cybersecurity Strategist at Yokogawa, to present on the emerging cyber threats to industrial control systems. Again, thank you for being here, and we hope you will be able to attend our other webinars in the future. I would like now to pass it back to our host, Scott Morgan, Principal Consultant at Internex. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Menzies. Quick reminder to our participants, please enter any questions that you have during the presentation into the Q&A window, and we will be monitoring that. Just to note, those questions are only visible to the presenters and the hosts. And if we don't get to your question during the webinar, we will do our best to follow up with you and provide an answer afterwards. So onto the kind of main event. Since this is the first webinar in the series, we really wanted to set the stage on the emerging threats to industrial control systems, and more specifically on supply chain cybersecurity. So to do so, we have invited Camilo Gómez to present on this topic. Mr. Gómez, as you heard, is Global Cybersecurity Strategist at Yokogawa, with over 30 years of experience in OT and IT cybersecurity and industrial IT, delivering strategic thinking within Yokogawa and the automation industry. He currently chairs the subcommittee of the OPAF, the forum developing the Open Process Automation Standard, OPAS, as well as the Security Performance Metrics Working Group of ISA 99, the committee that's developing the ISA IEC 62443 standard for industrial automation and control system security. Mr. Gómez's broad experience encompasses leading OT and IT cybersecurity governance, risk management, architecture, and hands-on global programs, as well as industrial IT and network telecom, capital projects, and critical operations, with well-rounded international exposure in oil and gas, industrial automation, managed services, and business consulting. So with that, Camilo, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Scott and Mr. Menezes and Jamila, for the introduction and the opportunity. Welcome, everyone, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you today. Let me share my screens and take in over from Scott. So can you see my screen? I hope so. Well, as yep. Okay. The subject of the industrial control systems is very dear to me and is one in which I've been working for the last 21 years. The industrial control system cybersecurity and nowadays called OT. So you will hear me talking about the term OT and ICS throughout this presentation. So again, welcome. This is the first webinar of this series of emerging cyber threats to ICS. And in particular, this one is related to the supply chain cybersecurity threats. So let's move into subject. Our agenda for today, we'll start with an analysis of the threat, categorization if you want. We'll move into the subject of supply chain, but in particular end-to-end supply chain security or cybersecurity, and the roles that organizations need to have responding to threat. And finally, we will conclude with some recommendations on how-to recommendations for you. Let's go with the threat categorization. We start with the indicators of threat. Typically, the indicators of threats are headlines, and these are examples of the headlines on the some of the headlines from the last 90 days. As you can see, when you look at headlines, there are several things to take away. The first one is that these things are happening everywhere and are affecting organizations and infrastructure with big consequences. And to analyze the threat, the first thing we need to do is we need to do it from the perspective of the consequence. And I'm going to provide 3 examples here that are dear to many of your businesses and subjects and industries, of course. The first one is an example of an attack made to an electric grid company and the consequences for that, as you can see here. It was an hour-long blackout only, but 225,000 customers were affected, and basically shut down 1/5 of the electric power in one city. There's a second type of attack. It's an attack that happened to a product supplier. And in this case, you can see that there's also, there were some or big impacts and consequences from this attack in 2020 to a product supplier, not to a utility, but product in this case, where thousands of organizations, customer organizations, were compromised, and of course, with a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to the product supplier. And most recently, you have seen another one, which is dear to utilities, pipeline. And in this case, the shutdown lasted 6 days, affected the distribution of fuel, gasoline, diesel for jets and others, and created a panic shortage that affected communities, commerce, air travel, nations, and forced an emergency declaration in the District of Columbia and 17 states. So the thing to have into account when we look to threat is there are 2 things: impact. Who are the organizations that are impacted? Of course, if organizations are impacted, there are consequences, and the consequences are far beyond the organization that is impacted. Let's look into the threat attribution. When there's a threat, we tend to think about who's the source of the threat. However, the most important is what is that target of that threat, what they're looking after. So are they looking after your organization, your businesses, your infrastructure, our communities, your region, the world, right? So the first thing to have into account is threat has a target and is some of us. Now, yeah, it's important to know what types of threat agents are there, but more importantly than who are them is why they have a motive and what is their capability. In most cases, the motives are not clear, are hard to see, but of course you can see that the motives in general could lie on economical gain, knowledge gain, or some harm. So now that we know the why and the what, is how they can make this threat visible, this target, this consequence visible for them. And what they're doing is then they are targeting now people and the technology that supports your business process, your infrastructure, your organizations. And as Mr. Menes has mentioned, in particular, they're targeting the vulnerability of your technology. Your IT technology, but also your industrial control system or OT technology, manufacturing, telecommunications, and so on. Everything that is supporting your business. So what is important next? What is under your control? Of course, controlling the motive is not that simple. It's possible, but what we can do in a way is control the capability, but disabling or making it more difficult. But we can also manage that vulnerability and, of course, work to prevent all consequences. So let's have a look now into the vulnerability, specifically the how. So the things to have into account when we look into vulnerability are two. Of course, there are vulnerabilities that have to do with our operational technology infrastructure and our information technology infrastructure and people, of course, right? These attacks examples or consequences that I use are a good example of what's happening. In the first case, the electric grid attack is a model that was targeting the operational technology of a business. In the second case, the pipeline attack was using a more elaborate model, modular deployment, etc. That again was targeting the, in this case, the IT systems of an organization. And they do that by implanting malware, managing to implant malware in the organization and get there. The pipeline is an interesting one because notice that is an infrastructure business. The attack happened to their IT systems, not to their OT systems. However, they were forced to shut down the pipeline. So even though the operational technology systems were not compromised and were fully functional, because of the integration, and this is a part as a myth that so many have, that the operational side can fully and independently operate outside or separately from the IT side. Well, this is an example that is not always the case. And the third example is the product supplier was subject to a new type of attack. It's called supply chain attack. And it's an attack now that is interesting because it's going after the product supplier. And this is about implanting malware in the components that these product suppliers are building. Now, of course, notice the difference. This is target to probably some specific business, but when they target the product supplier, the target audience is a lot larger. It's not just now a company, a specific name, but entire set of consumers. So it's a large group. So have that into account. Now, let's move into what is the thing. What is important about this is that all these attacks were preventable. Even this one of the supply chain attack where the attacker implanted malware in a product. If you actually check some of the advisories, the CISA advisory, in fact, is one that I can refer in particular. And then you can see that this attack could have been prevented by firewall rules that were monitoring or preventing outbound traffic to the internet. So what is important to recall here? First, that the attack is evolving and the methods and exploits of those are evolving, of course, continuously. It's important also to distinguish between a technical flaw in a product and a backdoor, as in the supply chain attack, in the example that we have provided. And the next thing to have into account is that vulnerability develops over time. It's not something static and changes, and is something that is discovered because what? These attackers are trying to maximize the opportunity of what they can affect, of course, right? And if you are well defended, they will go after your supply chain, as it is I have explained here before, but they can be doing more. So now let's look into what are an important topic. If you are one of those who still think that threat is not real, or threat is just something that happens to a few businesses or countries, well, we have news to you. We have in Yokogawa, we have compiled a dashboard of global regulation, and you can see this map that regulation is all over the place. Actually, there's regulation, cybersecurity regulation existing in 193 states today, countries, places such as Fiji, Tonga, Lithuania, Bhutan. So it's not just the big nations that you tend to hear in the news. It's everybody's concerned, and many are taking action. So it's an only important thing to have into account is that this regulation is not something that's happened today, just today. Some of this regulation has been and is being in place since 2002. And the regulation, the other myth is people tend to think that regulation is about cybercrime. And no, the regulation is not only to those who commit the crime, the regulation is also to those who need to, for the work they need to do in terms to do data protection, protect the data. So regulation affects all of us. And the other important thing to have into account is regulation is enacted, it's also enforced. So we also don't wait until you have an incident so you can see the effects of the enforced regulation. So one good example, an example of this pipeline, as a consequence of the pipeline, the TSA had to take some actions and enacted a security directive for the purpose of data protection, in which they clearly stated that the scope includes both the IT and OT systems or any data that, if exploited, could result in an operational disruption. And notice that it also states that that include business services, their IT services or services outside, that if compromised, in this case, could create the disruption, the billing system. Maybe because the billing system was compromised, you have to shut down the entire plant, the facility, or your infrastructure. So what is the specific mandate? It's also interesting because this legislation now is looking into how ways to protect or generate data protection. And the first one, of course, is by the establishment of a cybersecurity implementation plan. These are the measures and the plans and procedures and all the things you need to have into account to protect your asset from the data protection standpoint of view, of course. But one of the or next important things of this mandate is they require a cybersecurity incident response. That means that they're saying you not only plan to prevent, you plan to respond. There's a possibility things will happen, you know how to respond to them, you need to have a plan, and their mandate is asking to have one. And finally, it's not good enough to have those two. You need to have a program to continuously assess and evaluate everything from your technology capabilities, your technology controls, the defense controls, to your processes and procedures for response, for incident management, and so on. So let's move now into directly the topic of supply chain cybersecurity with background and context. So what is end-to-end supply chain cybersecurity? Typically, we tend to look the supply as anybody who is providing something to me, right? A product, service. So we tend to say that the problem is in my supply, I have nothing to say. The problem with that is that we forget that one man's floor is another man's ceiling. So my supply might also have a supplier, maybe also a customer like you are. And not only that, you are also a supplier to others. And in many cases, like in your industries or your organizations, you provide services to what? To communities, to society. So overall, we cannot forget that we have customers and those customers of my customers. So the responsibility is related to end-to-end, not just to me, to my supply chain. So when you hear supply chain, people can say, oh, something in my supply, you are a supplier too, you need to do something. So this is an end-to-end responsibility. Now, it's important to understand the difference between personas and roles. As I mentioned, we all have the role of being a supplier, a customer. We have the roles, different roles in life, and there are different personas. So do not confuse the persona with the roles, because we all have both roles. So what can you do to tackle this problem of the threat and vulnerability in the how to our technology? The way to do it is to start with your security risk management. So a good example, and then something I like to use to explain this, is the risk bow tie. At the center of the risk bow tie, we have the cyber threat event. So this is the possibility that something will happen. So we start with that. Something could happen or will happen. If I don't have that in mind, I have a problem. If I have that in mind, that something will happen, then I need to identify how I'm going to prevent that something to happen. What measures of protections I need to have in place. But not only that, if it happened or it happens, I need to do something. I need to recover. I need to lessen the effects of that cyber threat to happen. So the whole purpose of the bow tie, excuse me, my mouse moved out of place. The whole purpose of the bow tie, of course, is so how you prevent something wrong to come in that will create something bad as an outcome. So you have the cyber threats as your something wrong, and what you can do to prevent, although it can happen, it can come in, how you prevent bad consequences from it. So of course, the protection has to do with two dear subjects, managing or dealing with the vulnerability and the likelihood of that vulnerability. And the response have to do with the recovery, have to do with the containing the event that happened, responding to it, and restoring their operations so you won't have consequences, or you can lessen the consequences. So this grid represents some of your businesses. So what we're protecting is what? The technology that is building that business, your organization, your infrastructure, whatever you're providing. And then there are vulnerabilities that will happen and we will develop in the technology over time. Technology evolves and matures, and these agents are continuously looking for ways to identify or exploit vulnerabilities. So the dark diamond, or the full diamond, is an example of existing vulnerabilities. And the empty one is one that is an example of unknown. This supply chain could happen. Attack. So it's about lessening the effect. How do you lessen the effect? Well, by creating barriers. The bow tie is about what are the barriers we can put in place. And the first thing to have into account is the first barrier, as illustrated by the TSA pipeline directive, is the security program. You need to have a program, and the program that covers not only your protection, but everything end to end. Then you need to have your policies and procedures. You need to have a mandate and start to create the elements for organization and people to implement and manage your technology and the security in your technology. You start building defenses in your technology infrastructure. You need to start building the defenses or the capability, enabling the capability defenses in your products or your technology that you're using. And finally, you implement detection mechanisms to identify if something is happening. But if it happened, well, you need to have a way to triage procedures for managing the risk, the event, alerting the risk or the event, and start doing something. What that is something is also needs to be, it's called the incident response, and the communications needs to be documented set of procedures and actions. But more importantly, they not only need to be documented, they need to be exercised. As you heard, I come from a big part of my career was in oil and gas, and the safety is ensured big time by really practicing. If you don't practice, you need to practice security as well. Now, organization impact management, once you put that in place, you need to know how you're going to manage the impact within the organization, your financial impact, your safety impact, depending on what that threat technology have been affected. You need to have to manage your potential impact, sometimes more than one, your financial, your operational, or your safety, as I mentioned before. And then you also need to think about what would happen learning from that event, closing and making this a cycle. Now, it's not only important to build defenses and know how to respond, but also learn from them so you can do it better next time. So that lessons learned normally supported through forensics. Now, forensics is all used by law enforcement later to be able to do attribution on other stuff so that the crime can be penalized if it happened. Right? So have the connecting the dots, look into this bow tie and what the TSA directive is doing. We have the implementation plan end-to-end. We have a security assessment program for checking all these controls, procedural and technical controls, and your incident response plan. So it's important that we make some distinctions when we talk into the OT and IT supply chain. So there are some challenges, of course. The first one is technology. In IT refreshes every 2 to 5 years. It's normal. Maybe if you are a mobile phone user, you're changing your mobile phone every year. So this frequency is very high. On the other side, it's not that high. The frequency to change technology is, I'll put 5 years high, and this is really optimistic. Normally it takes more than that, 10 to 15 years to really make any technology refresh. Why? The size of the capital projects. Your utility transmission network costs probably millions or billions of dollars to build, and probably several months or years to make it happen. So these are not small projects, they are big projects. And there are big capital investments, of course, for either nations or organizations to make. And then, of course, the technology used to there is something that you expect to last a long time. The problem is, in both cases for IT and OT, is that what is the heavy or the weight of the budget? Of course, in capital projects, it's very high in the project side, but in operations, it's very low. And it happens for both IT and OT. So when you need to make corrections at when in operation, is very much more difficult, it's harder, because in many cases you don't have the money to do it. So the last challenge that we need to have into account here is that built-in capability. Because the technology is refreshed in IT, of course, your legacy is typically somewhat capable. But in the ICS, industrial control side, you might have systems that are probably not security capable, or with a very or less capable than normal because of your refresh rate, right? So these are things that you need to have into account, because you require elements to protect more defenses. You protect something that is not capable by creating shield defenses, correct? So there are some strengths also that each one of these two have. And in terms of the cybersecurity for these two environments, of course, you have learned in previous webinars that there are standards for the protection and defining the security measures and probably organizational measures and procedural measures to protect IT assets. And it's the ISO 27000. On the OT side, similarly, there's a standard, very well established, the IC 62443 standard. Notice that IC 62443 is also making reference to IT, because what? Many of the technology that is used in IT is also used in OT, is used with a special purpose. There are things that happen in the OT side, as we know, that need to have to be in real time and be highly deterministic, and that's when we start making the difference. Now, what is the product certification? In terms of the certifying against the standards as a practice in the IT industry, that is something not very popular. It's very unpopular. The argument we refresh very often. On the OT side, it's very prevalent. So for both suppliers and the OT side, and suppliers and consumers and users on the OT side, is requiring certification of product. The product certification is very important. And of course, many of these products have safety implications. So you like your products to be certified for safety. Similarly, you like to have your product certified for security. And nowadays, products are getting certified for interoperability, the open process automation. Now, standards supply an important assurance. Well, no, the assurance comes normally from the certification, but the certification against standards will provide assurances. And on the IT side, as I mentioned to you, certifications are not very popular. So there is some assurance that you can get from IT products, but you have no confirmation if there is no certification. On the OT side, on the other hand, you can see that both the product suppliers and the product supplier organization are certified. So not only the products are certified, but the organizations building those products are certified to ensure that they have processes that I will describe in one of my next slides. So this is about now the how-to recommendations, what to do to conclude. Of course, I mentioned standards to you. I work with the standard organizations. So the standards contain common sense, best practices provided by several actors, roles, right? And these actors are end users, academia, governments, product suppliers, service suppliers, and you name it. And there are contributors from all these areas in the building of these standards. And now, not only that, the standards are built having into account that input, but also they are built and constructed in the case of the 62443 standard. It's a series of standards, as you can see, not just one part. It has several parts. And several parts are applicable to the different roles. The one man's floor is not another man's ceiling. Example that I made to you before. So you can see that for the asset owner, there are parts that tell organizations how to what are the things that the security program needs to have at a minimum. What are the security technologies they could use? What is the process to do risk assessment if you in a more structured bow tie, if you want? What are for the services provider? What are the processes for patch management? Excuse me, therefore the typo. What are the processes that service providers need to have in place in order to manage and maintain the security of your systems and components throughout the life cycle of your asset? There are standards that tells the system integrator what are the security controls for the systems that are building and putting together. What are the controls to manage and integrate them as well and support them through the life cycle? And then there are standards in the bottom part related to the product supplier that tells the product suppliers what are the minimum technical requirements that their or capabilities that your systems need to have or your components need to have. And more importantly, as I mentioned to you, the secure development practices within your organization to support your components. Because this is what we get with OT product security certification and standards. First, you get the ability to build a product that is secure by design. And of course, you use that doesn't mean that is not vulnerable. No, it's built with security in mind. It's designed with the security in mind. It's built with security capabilities. And at least what certification is going to provide to you is that at time of certification, that product is free of known vulnerabilities. But that is the starting point, because if you have your organization certified, now you can get other assurances as the product lifecycle security assurance, where not only organizations are responsible to support the security capability in your component, but also manage vulnerability through the product at end of life, right? So that gives you assurance that new vulnerabilities are going to be managed and responded by your suppliers. So this is the good message that the OT product supply chains brings to you. And then let's move into, for the more technical, we want to leave you with a couple of messages. Of course, if you want to know more about vulnerability and how to manage vulnerability and so on, there are several things, places that you need to, you can use or consult your sources. You can use, of course. The first one is the ITCVE. This is, as you can see here, is a program whose mission is to identify, create a catalog of publicly, they say disclosed, known cybersecurity vulnerabilities, correct? So you have a catalog there. OT, CISA, in particular, I mentioned to you as the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency is doing a lot of work about the protection and vulnerability awareness within the industrial control systems, OT space. So they have lots of information. The advisories, most of the OT supply organizations report vulnerabilities or when they are discovered and they are disclose with them to CISA as a process, make communications and everything not, I guess, publicly know. And organizations start to tackle their vulnerabilities right after, or give you a response of what they have done. And then finally, there's an important thing, because it's important to know your vulnerabilities. It's important to know your ways to respond to them. And it's important also to understand that bow tie that I mentioned to you applies to you, but it also applies to your suppliers. Suppliers have their own bow tie and stuff. But when we deal with a threat, we also need to start to learn how the attacker operates. What are the things and the techniques and tactics that these adversaries, these threat actors use. So a good place to go for that is called the M3 attack. So you can reference to that whenever you have a chance. Well, I hope this has been informational. I'm finishing with a slide where I have included several references about what we have discussed today. And I hope this has been and will be useful and a great appetizer for what you have to see ahead in this webinar series. Thank you. With that, we're back to you, Scott, for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Camilo. Yeah, we had a couple questions come in. I'll start with kind of a broader one. So I think you sort of alluded to it in talking about sort of the myth of the separation between OT and IT, but the question was, why is industry still trying to rely on saying that their systems are air-gapped? And is that something you still see?
It's a good question, but it's a question more than the supply. I think we're forgetting and realizing that there is a high integration between IT and OT today. The need for and the speed of the business and progress and technology and decision making requires for many times to be able to have access to that real-time information in the field. So when we think that there are no links or relationships into that, well, the because we have the examples and the examples that I mentioned in the presentation that it happens. And it could be, it's not just a link. Maybe it's just business dependencies. If you have no way to control your billing, maybe in this case you make a decision for stopping your the production, because otherwise you don't know how much product and to whom and to where and so on being dispatched. That creates crisis. So there are links, and the links are there, and we all need to be mindful that all of our business have those links.
Okay, great, thank you. And so actually there's a slightly related question. I was going to ask Jamila if she wanted to take a crack at this one as well. Start with her, but so kind of we're given to understand that there is a disconnect between the IoT engineers and the traditional electrical or structural operational engineers with respect to cybersecurity. So to date, the IoT have focused on cyber while the other groups have been excluded. So think Stuxnet, I guess. What steps are being taken to bring those two sides together?
Those two sides are coming together big time, as I mentioned to you. Look, there's a convergence happening, and I'll make the part of the strengths. Of course, we are standardizing processes. Part of the convergence it has to do on the OT side. The OT side is very happy to adopt the technologies, the rapid technologies, and those are enablers to make their business better, and so on. So there's an appetite to adopt IT technologies into the OT space. What the appetite and what is not that much appetite is for in order to adopt things that can happen in a space like IT, where things can change rapidly and quickly. But the consequences are a lot different than the consequences that you have here. So it's coming in terms of awareness, education, conversation, aligning goals, and as you can see, this the one thing that I like to highlight is this diagram here, and the example is the SD directive. The SD directive is saying it applies to both IT and OT systems. So you either get together and work together, or you will be, because all these controls need to apply to both. For them, it is for the security directive, they were very clear and explicit that it's applicable, and sorry for this one, to both IT and OT systems. So these plans need to be end-to-end and need to have into account both the IT and the OT side. So that convergence, the convergence in terms of what to protect is technology. There are different technologies, the how, but an overall end-to-end program. And that's a convergence we need to have. It's technology, and if one end is impacted, the other can be impacted as well.
Great, thank you. We have a request to show the last slide with the resources one more time. I think maybe people can take a quick screenshot if they need to, but I'll send a reminder that we will be posting the slides at a later date, so those will be available. And eventually we'll have this in a kind of even more shareable format with clickable links in a compendium. So another question that we received. So let's see. Is only implementation of firewalls going to make security when merging IT and OT? I guess, can you talk a bit more about sort of those strategies of achieving that convergence, and is firewall, I heard a kind of sarcastic answer of like, is there one killer technology that everyone needs? And the somewhat joking answer was firewalls. But so is it only firewalls, or is there more to talk about?
No, actually, great. It's a good question, and it's also part of that myth, or one of the myths there. And for me, the example is the bow tie. Well, that's what I love the bow tie that much. It's a good example. Yeah, a firewall is not going to do it much if you have the processes and procedures to maintain and to create the right rules. Yes, you have a supply chain attack in that example of the product supplier, right? But if you don't have the right processes and procedures to maintain the rules. Yes, you do have a firewall, and notice that even if you have a firewall, that attack was effective, was able to happen. Why? Or the vulnerability was being able to be exploited. Why? Because it was not well configured, right? And have the right configuration. So it's not only enough to have a firewall, it needs to be configured, but that's nothing. There are many more things. And I mentioned one thing here in the middle. So that is the infrastructure defense, the firewall that we made. And there are several types of other technologies. Firewall is just one example. Yeah, of course, you have to have segregation, network segregation, and other artifacts, and of course, but you also build capability. If your products don't have the capability to identify the unauthorized access, the authorized access, if your capabilities or secure that authorized access and etc., you have an issue. So there are several things you need to do in terms of infrastructure. That was several things then of processes and procedures, starting with that infrastructure, your infrastructure and defenses there, layer defense, and so on. The building and enabling the capability of your components, the capability to monitor, the capability to log, the audit records, report, etc. There are tons of security capabilities you need. And then you build also detection mechanisms. And then some of them are by creating trust in your components, in your technology. Some of them have to do by putting something external to monitor connections and identify abnormal behaviors or abnormal, being able to identify those. So there are many more things you need to do. And as I said, if you just concentrate on this part, you have half of the equation. Do you really know how to respond? Because don't forget, it's not only to try to prevent, but this starts with the possibility that a cyber threat event can happen.
Great, thank you. So one potentially last question as we get close to the end of the hour here. So you talked a bit about the difference between IT and OT. I guess, do you see any nuances between sort of the different roles that third parties, that suppliers play on the IT side versus the OT side, and does that have sort of knock-on consequences as you think about your prevention?
Yeah, I see the nuances, of course. I mentioned is a challenge, and well, the product certification, security certification of products in the supply chain, OT supply chain, is a strength, but actually is not that strong in the IT side, on the IT side. And yes, as I mentioned to you, there's one thing that's happening in the OT industry, the need of these digital transformation, the need to adopt, and the ability to adopt new technologies and rapidly adopt technologies that are developed, of course, first on the IT side and then adopted by the OT side, that enable and make your business happy, better, and more proficient, and whatever it is. So it's important. These the need to adopt these technologies makes of course open the doors to create and adopt these technologies into the OT side. The thing is this lack of awareness, to the point of one of the previous questions of the one side of the other, and how one business and the other works, will create a big impact. So be mindful, because some of these products are probably not that are you using and incorporating are not having into account that you're looking for products that can last for several years, right? That could be in place for several years. That you're trying to work with a supplier that is going to give you assurance that your products will be supported through the end of life. That the end of life of your product is not in 6 months or a month, or that the company that created your product doesn't exist anymore. So those are important things to have into account when you select your product supply. The product supply needs to be responsible, and that's one last word I want to give there. Look for your supply chain, and look for responsible cybersecurity supply chain.
No, that's great. So seeing we're just about at the top of the hour, so let me quickly say thank you to all of our participants and all of the questions that we received. And I'll turn it over to Jamila.
I wanted to thank everybody who attended, who stayed with us through the presentation, and a big thank you to Camilo for this very great presentation, for setting up the stage for the upcoming webinar. So Camilo, we really appreciate the knowledge you shared and answering all the questions. So we see there's a lot of interest already through the questions and chat. So we will be posting the webinar and the presentation on. That's a question on when it will be to Scott and USCA colleagues, but as soon as possible, we'll put it up on the website, the same site where we'll have all the information from the first round of webinars. Thank you, Scott, for moderating.
All right, thank you, Jamila.
You're most welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, so yeah, as Jamila alluded, so our second webinar in this series will be on the internationally accepted standards and guidelines. So a little bit deeper dive into some of those standards that Camilo identified already, that are relevant to identifying and managing cybersecurity risks associated with third parties and suppliers. That will take place on January 11th in the new year. So webinars will proceed about every other week thereafter. So please be on the lookout for email announcements and, as Jamil said, on the website. So with that, let me say thank you again to participants, and thank you again to Camilo and Jamila and Mr. Menzies, USCA, and I hope to see you again in the new year. And so have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.